Today I'm going to get you started on the Digital Butler projects. The Digital Butler project is not your typical homework. Let's see, why did I say that? The goal of the business simulation, the Digital Butler work, is to apply what you're learning in class to new situations that you might encounter in the business world. More authentic work than what is in the back of your chapters. Graduates need practice with ambiguous, unstructured business situations because that's what you'll run into in the field when you graduate. It's not going to look like the back of the chapter. So while the back of the chapter helps you to acquire the knowledge and the concepts and the procedures, you need practice applying it before you get out there so that you will feel comfortable and know how to go about working with less structured, less fully known situations. So your concepts and procedures that you're learning are important, but they're important because they're useful in solving authentic business problems and becoming a business advisor. So, because these simulations do not have all the information you need, there's some ambiguity and there's some unknowns. There's no clear-cut perfect solution. There's many good approaches. The mission is for you to make sense of the accounting data that's in the project and then explain to the client what the data means to the client's business, specifically for them in non-technical language. We'll give you a task list in the project to work through, and that's to help you get started and to focus you in the areas that may need some attention and that you may need to review in order to comprehend what's going on in the business situation. But the goal is not to work through the task list. The goal is to give your client business advice, to be a valued business advisor. Your client has not asked for the computation, even though the project requires you or requests that you do the computations because they will lead you to find the important things that will help your client. The client wants your findings and your feedback, so you have to digest your work and the computations and then offer the client diagrams, charts, schedules, explanations, reasoning to help them to understand how this is impacting their business. If you look at the grading rubric for my classes, half of the points are based on getting the technical part correct, and the other half is your ability to discern what those computations meant and how they impact the client, and explaining it to the client in a way that the client can understand. These projects do not require you to speculate on future markets or demand. You can work with just the data you're given, even though it's incomplete. If you are working for another instructor, your rubric may show a slightly different point breakdown, and that's okay. Just go and see what your particular class is going to give in terms of the breakdown of points. Just remember, the big goal is what it is you're going to finally address. Even if you remember, there's no perfect blueprint to being useful. CASE gives you ideas about what to do and exposes you into ways you could be useful, creating business intelligence. So for instance, you're going to create a live model in Excel, and I'm going to show you how to do that in the next video, so that you can learn how to explore the important variables to your client's business. Before we do that, let's just take a look at some projects that have been submitted by students in prior semesters and just get a feel for, if you were the client, what would be useful and what would not be useful. So put your client hat on a minute. Let's say that your advisor, business advisor, handed you this sheet. What would be your first reaction? For most of my students, their reaction is kind of a financial blur, that there's just too many things happening on the page, that those colors are extremely bold and kind of random, and it's hard to even begin to know where to focus your eyes. And so this is overly complex. What the student wanted to show was actual versus budget. But this is a lot more than actual versus budget. In fact, there's this column C here that has numbers in it and it doesn't even have a label. It's unclear what the bold green and blue, green and red are about. So it's overdone too complicated. Let's look at another one. What would you think about this one if you were a client? So here we have a schedule that kind of goes in the opposite direction of the one we just looked at. So this is overly simple, that it's really just showing two amounts, what was due and what was collected, and it shows it in a schedule, and then it shows it in these two circles that you've collected 25% of the total. Not sure that you needed a diagram for that message. So the diagram is overdone for the simple message, which is you've collected a fourth of what you billed. Here is another attempt to show actual versus plan, and you can actually tell from the blue and the red stacks the difference between actual and plan, so it is effective. What is non-traditional about this is that this visual is a trend, usually left to right, where left is the older and the right is the newer. And this is actually not trend data. This is for one particular month, and it starts with sales on the left and profit on the right. So you're expecting it to be a trend, and it's not. So this may not be the best visual to show plan versus actual, even though it's partially effective. A client could read this. Here's another situation where you could read this, but it's an upside down income statement with sales at the bottom and profit at the top, and so you get a sense that there should be some progress or some order to it, and there's not really an order to the items on the left. So the other thing that a client would worry about here is that the projected in red is missing, even though the legend says that it's going to be there. So this one is clearly comparing actual to projected. The shading is so dark that in the red cells it's very difficult to read the contents, and if you made a copy of this and handed it to somebody, it would all be black. You couldn't see any of it. The gray on gray is difficult to read. The shading for the lines doesn't continue all the way over to the numbers, so I'm not sure that it's very helpful. Not sure why the bottom line is green or the top line is blue, and so it's overcolored. There's some typos. Look at depreciation expense for equipment in office, so that's distracting. Since the two columns don't match, it would be nice to have a difference column so that the client could immediately see where the differences were. So this one's readable, it's just not optimized. Here's one that the client would find a little easier to read. Notice that there's not a lot of color that's needed. You have the budget, you have the actual, you have the differences, and then you have an explanation for the differences. So this is crisp and clean, and it's easy to read. So sometimes a graph is helpful, and sometimes it's not necessary to give the client something that they can immediately go, okay, I can see that 17,000 of the difference is in sales and 11,000 of it is in something else. Here's another one, just a different artistic presentation of the same thing. Here's the monthly compared to actual, and then you see the difference column, and instead of having the explanation in the columns, they have them in the call out boxes, and there's a little bit of coloring here, but it's not overdone, and it's not so dark that if you made a handout of this that you couldn't read the cells any longer. Here's one where a graph is fairly effective. Here we have over time, January, that's the oldest month, and December, the most recent month, so we actually have a trend over time. And what we have here is that some months cash flows above profits and some months cash flows below profits. So you can kind of figure that out from looking at it here. And then hopefully the explanation, the client memo, would tell you why some months cash flow is above profit and some months cash flow is below profits. Here's another one where we're contrasting profit with cash flow, and clearly they're trying to show you that there was a disruption in this May-June month, and hopefully the memo would explain what happened in that time zone to cash flow. So this visual is effective in drawing your attention to the weird thing happened in May, or May and June. Here's another graph that's fairly effective. It shows cash flow climbing, but then it backs up every once in a while. It goes down. And so there's an explanation every time it goes down, and the call out boxes here explain each time it goes down what made it go down. So that's effective in explaining the months in which cash flow goes down versus up. Here was a project where the student was trying to show the client how small the locator project was. And the locator is the 0.03 on the left. So it's pretty obvious that that's smaller than the other product lines here. And so that visual is effective. Here was a profit forecast if you sold 40 of the various profit lines in the various months. The coloring is overdone. If you made a copy of this, it would all be dark gray and you wouldn't be able to read the contents. And the lime green, it's not needed, and it sort of overloads the census. So it's nicely formatted on the page, but the coloring and the labeling could be improved. Here's one that's relatively simple, but it's effective. I'm not sure what the coloring does to help you, but you can see you've got 3 different product lines, and they have 3 different levels of profitability. So the memo that went with this would refer you to this exhibit to see the different profitability of these 3 Butler products. So that should give you an idea of some better or some weaker ways of communicating with your client and get you kind of thinking about different things that you could do. So there's lots of good approaches and some things to avoid. On the next video, I'm going to show you how to create a live model in Excel.